It's my honor to introduce Victor Narsimulu. I'll give a little more of a formal introduction and then a little less formal afterwards. Victor comes from the island of Fiji. His people come from the island of Rotuma. Victor has had a lot of international experience, including in places like Ethiopia, India, China, and Japan. He earned his first degree, a bachelor's in anthropology from the University of Hawaii. His master's degree was here at BYU in organizational behavior with an emphasis on international development. And he is presently a PhD doctoral candidate in the School of Education. Victor is married to a wonderful woman named Marley, and he has a beautiful child, Tisa. And he has been a good, close friend for many years. We first enjoyed Victor's company while we were living in India, and he was a missionary living across the street from us, just below the mission home. And we really liked having Victor come to our house because we had a good Hindu cook, a wonderful woman named Sakama, who would cook wonderful meals for us. But then when we had guests come over, particularly the American missionaries, they wouldn't eat very much food, but Victor ate a lot of food. And it always made Sakama very happy that Victor was eating so much of her food. So we're really pleased to have him here. Victor has, I think, a great future before him. He's got some very, very interesting ideas. He started presenting at conferences. In fact, next week he presents at a conference in San Diego. Also, just on a side note, those that are interested in Pacific Island culture, we're very hopeful, and it looks very promising that he'll be teaching an anthropology course on the islands, probably starting in the fall here at BYU. And so some of you may be interested in that. Please watch for it. And with that, we'll turn the time over to you now, Victor.
Thank you, Dave, for that introduction. Dave's been a very good friend and almost like a family uncle to me. In fact, he didn't mention one of the reasons why I decided to go to BYU Hawaii and to go to school was because of Dave. When I was on a mission in Bangalore, I met Dave and his family, and he was one of my mentors in going into anthropology and studying cultures and eventually graduating from BYU Hawaii. I've in fact been associated with the Kennedy Center for the past probably 5 years. I've been working here and work for Dave. I work for Aaron now, and I've worked for other people. But I've always had a passion for understanding culture and understanding culture across borders. And the very fact you put yourself in that position makes you understand your culture more better. Next week I'll be presenting at a conference. It's called the Association for Social Anthropology in Oceania. It's an international conference which will be held in San Diego. And I'm very nervous because the people that I have mentioned in my paper, that I've quoted in my paper from the Pacific are going to be there. People from New Zealand, from Hawaii, from universities like Columbia and other big universities that have Pacific Island professors who emphasize on Pacific Island studies. I'm going to start off my presentation today with a chant. And this chant is, I've only done this chant about maybe 3 or 4 times. And my mom was up this last time, and she helped me learn it again. And she helped me remember the essence of this chant. This chant basically represents the 7 districts on the island of Rotuma in Fiji. Murie, 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 here. Murie, 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 here. Kalong, ngote kalong. Kalong, ngote kalong. Sorsete hen. Sorsete hen, kava ye tale usiafua. Kava fat hifu. Kava fat hifu. Murie, 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 murie. Nofua. Today I will address and give an overview of indigenous education and non-formal education in the Pacific Islands, while referring back to my Rutuman context. How was education defined in the Pacific Islands before the advent of missionaries and colonialism? Education was woven into the very tapestry of everyday life and social values. The type of education that I'm referring to is called non-formal education. Non-formal education is organized but not institutionalized education, contrary to the formal education you and I attend at this university. Facilitation of non-formal education in the Pacific Islands begins at an early age, at home by parents and extended family. In Rutuman context, this education was done by the mafua, or the elders, and they were literally walking, talking libraries who had information, genealogies, ways to do things in the Pacific Island context. In the Rutuman context, there's a profound Rutuman proverb, and this proverb goes like this: Hio rata, hio lafa. Hio rata, hio lafa. What hio rata, hio lafa literally means, it means if you step on a branch with intentions to break it, be sure to break it. And basically means that give your best effort in learning to be a Rutuman or a Pacific Islander. If you're going to be a Rutuman, make sure you do break the branch till it breaks. The primary role of education in Rutuma was to transmit fundamental values and beliefs, or the anga whakarutuma, to the younger generation. This was done by the elders. This brought about balance on the island because non-formal education helped Rutumans identify and solve problems in their own cultural framework. The advent of formal education to the Pacific brought a new form of education, a new framework of education, a new epistemology of education. And this epistemology was Western epistemology, or the Western framework of education that was started by the Greeks in the West. For us Pacific Islanders, contemporary Pacific Islanders today, we become educational brokers. We're brokering between two educational frameworks. And we learn to use our framework in understanding the other framework. And the very fact we become that makes us excellent brokers if we're able to understand who we are and put it in practice in understanding the other's education. 3 years ago, I interviewed Oisea Oitu on the village of Maha on the island of Rutuma. Oisea Oitu, a retired school teacher, an administrator, and a statesman in Rutuman society, and a very close relative, was very passionate about Pacific Island education, especially Rutuman education, and how the Rutuman kids today, weren't very interested in learning the traditional way of education, or traditional way of learning. This is what he said. He said that it is sad for me to know that my people today, the kids on the island today, are so attracted to the Western way of things, TV, magazines, that they're not interested in learning their ways of dance, chants, the very fact you get to go fish and where to fish, how to fish in the island. And he related to me a story that before he left the island, this was back in the 40s and 50s, and that time to be given a scholarship to go to Fiji was a big thing, and he was one of two students that were chosen to go to Fiji. But before he left, his father set him down on a mat. Of course, if you've been to Pacific Islands, every home you go to has a mat, and that is woven intricately and almost acts like plays the part of a carpet. But his father told him, Oisea and Rutuman. He said, Oisea, au la rako se fiti, au la rako se suva, ala se mamawek au anga whakarutuma. He said, Oisea, when you go to school in Suva or in Fiji, do not forget who you are or the ways of your people. As he did that, he pointed to the mat. And every time, if someone points to a mat, an older person points to the mat, and this is how you do it. Basically, Oisea, o la rako se rutuma, of se fiti, ala se mamaweko ang whakarutuma. In Rutuman culture, mats are woven gods. Mats are woven gods imbued with mana or power, and knowledge woven sacredly is a symbolism of one's Rutuman identity. So the very fact he pointed to this and said, do not forget who you are, that this is your identity. This is mana. This is who you are. This Rutumaness his father was referring to, do not forget his education, was referring to the education he received as a young man growing up, learning to fish, learning the seasons to plant, learning his genealogy, learning his chants. Learning is not an alien concept to Pacific Island, to the Pacific Islanders. Before the introduction of schooling in the 1830s, learning in the Pacific Islands came largely through observation, listening and imitating others, mainly adults who already had the knowledge. Celestial navigation. The Pacific Islanders were sailing the Pacific Ocean, the biggest ocean in the world, back and forth, knowing where they were going, knowing where the islands were. And if you've been to the Pacific Islands, there's so many islands that if you miss one island, if you blink, you can miss an island. But these people knew where they were going by following the stars, the waves, the debris, the birds. So this was Pacific Island education, a Pacific Island way of learning. Learning was a sacred ingredient to the Pacific way of life. In the Fijian language, the word Yalo Matua, as defined by Unaisi Nambombo, a Fijian educator, is said to reflect maturity and a spirit of sacredness of being. Maturity and a spirit of sacredness of being. Education was a sacred process in learning, and it was pertinent to the growth of Pacific Islanders. The new education introduced by the colonial power in the Pacific meant that the students were faced with the conflicting demands of Western school curriculum and those of their home cultures. The purposes, the content, and the processes of formal education conflicted with those of indigenous education. This approach continues today in the Pacific Islands, and among many minority communities here in the U.S. In the very Utah Valley, we have students here with Pacific Island who are ethnically Pacific Islanders. We have students in Salt Lake who face this challenge today, where they're put at this point where they have to choose between their learning at home and education in the formal setting, and for some reason they find it hard and difficult to relate one to the other. They compartmentalize the two ways of education. Today's new global curriculum is not astute enough to identify different educational epistemologies. That doesn't mean as Pacific Islanders will help us. There needs to be an alignment between the two education frameworks, the formal and the non-formal education. like Oisea did, like Oisea and Rutuma. He was able to understand. He became a perfect educational broker between Western education and his traditional education that he had learned as a Rutuman. Manulani Myers of the University of Hawaii, Hilo, posits these 8 points, and she says, get rid of the belief that we are somehow inferior. Get rid of the belief that we are somehow inferior. Remember your favorite teacher. Learn from the land, not simply about the land. Understand the words. Understand that words have mana or power. Question your belief of what education can do for you. Question your role in education. We need to question our role in education. We need to own our education. Expect more rigor. Understand the idea of epistemology. That there are other epistemologies, there are other frameworks of education out there. And we need to align them with our formal education. So we see that there is a need for us to revert back to the fundamental core values of our cultures. Only then can we preserve identity and progress in this global world. We need to deconstruct and decolonize our mindset from the concepts that pay little or no attention at all to the advantages of us within our own cultures. One of my favorite songs is Bob Marley's Redemption song, where he talks about in the chorus he says, emancipate yourself from that mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And he's talking to his people in the West Indies and African Americans. He's telling them, we're no longer in chains. We're no longer slaves. We need to emancipate ourselves from that mental slavery. We're no longer enslaved physically, but mentally, it's a mental slavery. We need to free ourselves. Stop blaming the other. Stop saying that because I'm in this socioeconomic status or this environment in Southwest Provo, that I can't become like, I can't go to BYU or I can't go to graduate school. Everything is possible. Just like the quote by Rutuman quote that says, "Hiot rata, hiot lafa." If you have intentions to break the branch, make sure you break it. Anything is possible. Just like the ancestors of old, the Polynesian ancestors of old, who traveled back and forth in the great Pacific Ocean, knowing where they were going. We need to navigate our future, and we need to adamantly take this charge if we need to get ahead in this world. Of course, we do blame the system. The system set up in a way that at the end of the day, if you're not from a specific socioeconomic background or a specific area, East Bench, that you will always be regarded as, well, this person didn't make it because he comes from that background. A lot of times ethnic comes into it. The ethnic background comes into it. Just because you live in that specific area. It doesn't matter if you come from that background. The important thing is that we need to own our own education. Despite the system, we need to navigate our future, just like those of old. There's Ward and Webb. They did research in the Micronesian islands, and they studied Micronesian navigators who used celestial navigation. And this is what they said. We would, however, point out one aspect of the way in which Micronesian navigators conceptualize their navigational environment, which highlights the confidence with which they work. The European at sea in a small vessel tends to envisage his situation as one in which his craft moves towards, passes by, and then away from fixed islands. The islands are secure and he is in motion. But to the Pulowat navigators of the Western Pacific, once on course, inverts the concept in his own navigation system, considers the canoe to be stationary. So the canoe is stationary in his concept, but the islands to move towards and past him. Such a vision seems to reflect a high level of security and confidence in the self and the dangers of the sea, in which it seems to weigh heavily on the continental man. We accept the risk, and we may surmise that a Western Pacific Islander in the past might well sail east, south, north, or west in search for new land, confident in the belief that, as usual, the islands would rise over the horizon to meet him. So these were confident, very confident celestial navigators. To them, their canoe was stationary, whereas the islands passed by from between them. So the very fact these celestial navigators were confident, may we use this example and rise over the expectations of our goals and wait for new opportunities to meet us in the global world. I have been blessed to be at this school, at BYU. The very reason that I'm here is because I'm a convert to the church. I was given the opportunity to go to school at BYU Hawaii. If it wasn't for BYU Hawaii, I don't think I would have made it this far. But if statistically you were to somehow take data on my family and, for example, maybe 2 generations back, it would be most unlikely for me to make it this far, to be a graduate student right now. I'm the first who ever finished high school in my family. To go further from high school. And that doesn't mean that it's an impossible thing. I know it's possible. For those of you who are planning to go for further studies, just understand that there is power beyond us that is willing to help you and I get through the journey of life. I think as a Pacific Islander, being in this institution, like I said, is a great blessing. But at the same time, we need to understand that we need to address the issues that we face today. I think we live in a bubble here at BYU. A lot of times I've interacted with students at the U, and I see how passionate they are about the issues that surround them and their communities. And these are Pacific Island students. But I see Pacific Island students here on campus, and we become so comfortable. Of course, this is the Lord's church and the Lord's school. At the same time, we need to address our issues that we face as individuals. First, we need to take and own our education. I just want to end with, before I turn the time over to question and answers, a favorite quote of mine that I've shared so many times before. Those of you who have heard me share it, it's a quote by Theodore Roosevelt. And I know some of my friends have probably heard it a million times, those who heard me talk. But Theodore Roosevelt said, far better it is to dare mighty things. Far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor souls who neither suffer much nor enjoy much, for they live in a great twilight without knowing victory nor defeat. So my advice to you is, dare mighty things, win glorious triumphs. There will be failure, but the important thing is that you're not on that plateau, waiting for time to come and go, but that you're striving to do something. So this is basically, I have a paper that I've written for the conference next week, which will be a longer paper, a more longer presentation. But for today, this is all I have. And hiot rata, hiot lafa. If you have intentions to step on a branch, make sure you break it. Go all the way. Thank you.
Victor, you mentioned that some Pacific Islanders are living in a bubbly world over here on campus. Can you mention some of those problems that you have heard or have encountered that could be brought to light for the others to hear of what the Polynesian students are going through, please?
I don't know if there are problems, but I think the issue is that we have no, we're not giving back to the community. We're not helping those in the community to get to the stage where we're at. Unlike the students at the U or Salt Lake community, where there's so much interaction between the school, the students, and the community, and empowering other students who are in high school to get to the stage we're at today. And I do understand that we have the luau, which does define what Pacific Island culture is, but it's not the only way of defining who you are. Once a year, luau is a great thing, but it's not the only thing that can define and help our other fellow students, Pacific Islanders who are in high schools here, to get to the stage where we're at right now. Does that, I hope, somehow answer your...
So you mentioned these different epistemologies and the differences between a Western epistemology and a more local epistemology for the islands, or specifically Rotuma. I'm wondering if you could give some more examples. I'd be very interested in what those differences are, maybe not just in epistemologies, but other paradigms that in Rotuma they may be different, but they'd be very important for someone who is trying to understand Rotuman culture.
I'll start with the Western epistemology, where people like Descartes, they talked about knowledge and knowing, and it's knowing from here first before it gets here. And so knowledge is knowing through intuition and the mind. Whereas in the Pacific Islands, and specifically Rotuma, knowledge is like what Manulani talked about at the U, is knowing from here first. Is feeling that the very fact that the words have mana, that there's power over here. You learn, you know here first. Knowledge goes here and then here. Does that somehow? So there's a different way of learning, that you learn from here, and then you come to a setting like this. And in the Pacific, first when missionaries came over, like I said, there was learning already, there was education. But they came with these schools, with 4 walls, and they told these kids, okay, now we're going to learn. Teacher went up to the board, scribbled ABCD, and the kids had to learn. It was a different way of learning. It wasn't learning from here, but it was learning from just sitting in the classroom and watching the teacher scribble on the board. A different way of learning. A Western epistemology of learning. And there is a gap between learning from here, learning through observation, learning like a child growing up, and this is a research that was done in the 70s in Hawaii, where they found that Native Hawaiians were having a hard time in the public schools. And the reason why was because there was no Hawaiianness in the school setting, in the curriculum. At home, these kids were the smartest kids. They knew their chants. They knew the very fact rigorous motions for different dances. They were very smart at their home setting. But when they came to school, that wasn't somehow transmitted into the school setting. But in the 80s, the Hawaiian public schools were able to bring Hawaiian way of education, the Hawaiianness, into the classroom setting. So a child going to school, very fact that he knew or she knew that after my math or English class, which is English, for example, is not part of the way of life, but it's a way of life for us to become competent in this global world. But after an English class, the very fact they knew that I have a Hawaiian genealogy class, or I have a Hawaiian hula class, that added to that empowered them to somehow build a bridge between formal, traditional education and non-formal education.
Victor, is it you do a translation then for us? Because most of us, or a number of us anyway, are Western, and so we're used to the head thing. But when you say from here, is that talking about passion? Is that character? What is the difference? What is this? If this is logical mind, reasoning, that kind of, when you make this gesture?
I think it's according to Mondamin, and when she was talking about, she defined it in a more in an academic way. Can't remember how she defined it, but I think learning from here is learning is like in Samoan they call it in Tongan it's anga whakatonga, in Samoan it's the whaasamoa. In Fijian it's the nakavakubanua, where you learn. It's almost like you have the spirit and you have the spirit of the land, where there's certain things you just learn from here and here. You don't have to go to school to learn. It's almost like intuition. It's almost a metaphysical experience you can have if you go in that context. That you know when to. I usually share with my students in the prep seminar that when we share about privacy, that in the islands there is privacy. For example, if you go to Samoa, they have fales. And privacy in America is where you build picket fences and walls so you don't cross the boundary. It's your boundary, that's your turf, this is my boundary. In Samoa, they have open fales. There's no walls. Where's privacy there? There is privacy there. Privacy exists in the neck. You just know when to look, when to turn the neck, and when not to. You may be walking down the road going in Fiji somewhere, and there's an old lady, auntie, washing clothes, and they say, "Bula," and you say, "Bula," and she may be half naked just because she's washing clothes in the river. But the very fact not to look, because she's washing clothes, They'll say hello, and you'll have kids with no pants just jumping in the river, but you know when to look and when not to look. It's the intuition. It's learning from here, and you know when to turn your head and when not to turn your head. So that's an example of intuition and learning from the gut up.
Victor, you mentioned your quote, like if you intend to break the branch, step on it to break it. Talking about islanders going to school here, they want to maintain their heritage, and with Western culture, there's a fine balance between breaking the branch all the way, that's acceptable to Western culture. From your past experience, what's your safety zone for that? Where, for example, I want to be a Fijian all the way. At the same time, have to be aware that some aspects of the culture may not be acceptable in this culture. What has been your measure for that?
I don't know if I can answer that question, but I think you'd be the best person to answer that question. But in my experience, I think I'd go with what Oisea or what our parents told us when we left the island or left our homes. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget who you are. And everyone, it applies to everyone. When you leave the door to go and take your adventure into life, into the world, and your parents probably set you down and said, whatever you do, remember that who you are. Don't forget who you are. And I think if you're able to, and we've talked about this in a lot of our classes, is you become a broker between the two ways of life, and you're able to jump between frameworks different ways of life. I don't know if I answered that, but it's how you align your traditional way of life to the educational way of life, and you're the best judge of it. There's certain things you think would better work for you than for me. I do certain things that I still I'm able to still keep in touch with my being from the islands in how I do things in the community. So I think you'd be the best judge for that. Julie.
This is related somewhat to Isaki's question, but I have a question about, you talked about being able to be an educational broker between two different epistemologies or two different ways of knowing. And then you also mentioned that Western systems are in many ways part of the problem in allowing students or learners from different backgrounds, Pacific Islanders or other ethnicities, to maintain their own sense of identity. Do you have any ideas about in what ways the systems could change to facilitate a broader space for people who have different epistemologies?
I think that has been the century-long question. And I think the American dream is that you come to America and you can become anything. That you work hard, that's the American dream. And that at the end of the day, you'll be successful. But then there's a little hidden clause that we see when we start living the dream. That despite the fact that the dream is that you can be nobody, you can be somebody, at the end of the day, who you are will still hinder your progress to getting the dream. A lot of it has to do with societal values that we live in America. But I think, like I told Isaki, at the end of the day, you have to take charge. Like Bob Marley said, emancipate yourself from that mental slavery. The system is isms and schisms. He talks about that in his song. But then, and he also goes on to say that the system can stop time. That the time is yours. It's your sacred time, your sacred place, and sacred space. That if anyone's going to make the difference in life, despite the fact the system's like that. I know the system, you have Nickelby now, No Child Left Behind, and other policies that in education that's trying their best to get everybody into school. But despite its policies, there's still so much lacking. So I think it depends on you and I to make the change as individuals. I mean, Bill Cosby is a big supporter of that. He goes around universities talking to African Americans, telling them that we can't point fingers at people anymore. We need to emancipate ourselves from that mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. At the end of the day, you and I have to take charge. Of course, the ill was done. I mean, the wrong was done. Like Alan Paton in Cry, the Beloved Country, the novel that he wrote in South Africa. Of course, the white men came, broke the village. But at the end of the day, we can't cry over broken villages or spilt milk. We have to do it for ourselves. As individuals, take the charge and own our education. I don't know, Jules, does that? I don't know if that does justice to your question.
Thanks, Victor. First, I'd like to tell you that you have attempted to break the branch, and you've done so successfully without denying your ancestral beliefs. I'd also like to ask you, for some of us in this room who, for a program's sake, maybe an internship or a field study, are going to go to the Pacific, how can we help and not hinder this process of the Pacific Islander students emancipating themselves and taking ownership of their education, because many of these internships or study abroad programs are for the purpose of going into the schools and helping to teach English or student teach. What do we need to be sensitive about here? Thank you.
I think the most important thing is, and we send student teachers to the Pacific and through the School of Education. And I think one of the philosophies that we try and instill in these students is, through the Kennedy Center, is to learn from where they are, to learn from the teachers the way the curriculum is set up in their way, and in that context, rather than imposing. And this is, a historical question that people have been asking for ages. That as a participant in another culture, we need to be culturally relative to the way things are done in their context. And a Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, said, those of you who know of this quote, "Go to the people, live among them, learn from them, work with them. But when the task is accomplished, the work is done, the people remark to themselves, we have done it ourselves." And that's, I think, to know that you're a change agent, but at the same time, it's like I shared with the prep course, that when you go to a new context, a new place, a new country, remember, just like Moses, when he went up to Mount Sinai, when he was in the presence of God, he had to take his shoes off. The reason why was because that was a sacred place, a sacred space, God's sacred space and sacred place. When we go to a new context, and interact with a new culture, we need to understand that that's a new paradigm. We need to take our shoes off, because that place and that space is sacred to them. And we need to see from their perspective. Unless we do that, we won't be able to build that bridge. We're always talking about building bridges across cultures. And that bridge I think is a metaphor, but at the same time, it's a literal bridge that you and I build. Everything we do builds a better and stronger bridge for us to return. And if we don't build a strong bridge, we won't be able to return or get that reciprocity in return from the people we're working with. I don't know if that answers your question.
You discussed how difficult it was for maybe non-formal education, people who've received non-formal education, to come over to Western epistemology, just some aspects that's made it difficult. And just being like a Polynesian born here in the States, do you think it's the same, like equivalent, to go the other way, to have Western education all your life and try to go back and learn from non-formal education? Is there like a parallel between those two?
I don't know if you realize it, but even if you're born in America, you still have non-formal education at home. In everything you do at home with your family, with the extended family, that's non-formal education. Even if you don't speak the language, but you learn to learn from here as a Pacific Islander. So you can there's still ways to marry the two, formal and non-formal education. And I don't know, for kids who, a lot of times it becomes kids who grew up in the islands and kids who grew up over here. And there is difference. But the very fact that you grew up with parents who know what this kind of education is, learning from here and here, if we're able to marry the two frameworks of education, I think we can be like those Puluwat navigators of old, where we own our destination, we own our education. We know that we'll be still and the islands will pass by us, rather than us looking for islands. The islands will pass through us.
Okay, Vic, I know we kind of already addressed this, but I just wanted you to expound on it a little bit more. Obviously, there's a huge diaspora now. We've got Pacific Island communities in several countries. And a lot of what we're seeing is that we've got first-generation kids that come across, and their parents grew up with the native island education, in addition to a Western education, but learning from their parents, learning from the land, from the environment around them, and then you've got their children who are growing up in this atmosphere being taught certain things that might be contrary to what might be appropriate or deemed necessary as showing respect and having this kind of a relationship so that you can learn, like you were saying, from inside. How, like, you being a father now, and how do you think you're going to bridge that gap? Because I know that a lot of Polynesian communities in the Western United States are really struggling because these kids come over and they so greatly want to know their culture and have that ethnic identity, but yet they're being bombarded by these Western ideas. Like you talk about the kids in Rotuma. They're fascinated with the magazines, they're fascinated with the culture, and they so greatly want to be a part of that. How do you think, and for all the Pacific Islanders that are getting advanced degrees in education, how are they going to put it back in the community that these kids don't forget who they are and throw it to the wind? Because it's really, the rising generation that's going to be able to bridge this gap that this diaspora has caused. Mm-hmm. You've got the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles that are at home in the islands, and then you've got the other generation here, like in the U.S. or New Zealand or Australia.
Let me just share a quote to what you just asked, and adding on to Ginger's question. This is Tevita and Anapesika Ili. This is a Tongan family who grew up in Salt Lake. And this is an example, I quote, they say, "In pondering our childhood and upbringing in America, we were reminded of the many ways the Tongan language was taught and reinforced in our home. We were awakened to memories of our grandfather Tonga, sitting across from us, listening intensely as we attempted to translate a story we had just read in English into the Tongan language. We were encouraged to read out loud and in Tongan. Our grandparents would correct our enunciation and grammatical ordering of the Tongan words. These were a sense of sanctity associated with the Tongan language as we observed the way our grandparents cherished our native tongue. So there are portals for us to immerse ourselves in bridging our identity and reinforcing the way we succeed in education over here. There are ways, but I think the important thing is that we need to go back to the drawing boards, go back to the basics, go back to our parents, and parents need to reinforce that in their children. Of course we have disparities between in Pacific Island education in Western America, in the West Coast, but there are success stories. There are kids who are going to colleges. There are kids who are doing, staying out of gangs and going and doing great things. So I think if we can understand that we need to start from the basics. We need to go back to our grandparents, to our parents, and learn from them.
That was perfect. That's what I was thinking. And knowing the values that exist in a Pacific Island home, I was glad you highlighted on that because I've noticed that. And there are tons of success stories. I just wondered, what examples you could pull from the community, and that was perfect, what you just said.
Yeah.